Hi, good evening, everybody. Whoever is an attendee, please can you write on the chat box if you can see me and also hear me? You can just send in a yes or a no. If you can hear me, please send in a yes. All right, great. We will just wait for a minute for more people to join and then we'll be starting. All right, so we will be starting now. Good evening and welcome to one and all over here. Menstrual Hygiene Day is observed every year all across the world on May 28th. And in continuation to that, we welcome you all to our panel discussion, Conversations, Menstrual Disorders. The attempt is to find a collaborative way of mainstreaming conversations around menstruation and highlight aspects such as period poverty, taboos, menstrual health, and nutrition, destigmatizing blood and finding the right products. Organized by Pratisandhi, which is a student-led non-profit organization working towards sexual health and awareness amongst the youth of India, and Girl Up Rise, LSR chapter, a platform that seeks to facilitate expression of identities and reclamation of physical as well as metaphorical spaces. With an extremely wonderful panel here with us today who will be sharing their experiences and knowledge with us. We would also like to acknowledge and thank our kind sponsors, Heyday and Nine. Heyday for providing us with a 10% discount on their products, and Nine for sponsoring us with 10 goodie bags worth of rupees 1000 and over for our panelists and 6 lucky attendees. We'd also like to thank the co-founder of Nine, Radhika Khemka, for her support. What I'll be doing now is we'll be introducing the panel to all of you. We have on board with us Dr. Seema Sharma, a gynecologist, known for her sincerity, excellent bedside manners, and clinical acumen for diagnosing women's problems. Dr. Seema Sharma believes in a holistic approach to a woman's challenges with over 20 plus years of experience. She is a government representative appointed by the Ministry of Health for the District Advisory MTP Committee in West Delhi since 2011, and her book Clinical Essays in Obstetrical and Gynecology for MCROG2 has been chosen as a suggested reading for material for doctors who are preparing for the MRCOG exam by the Royal College. Charna, who is a menstrual activist, is an independent menstrual health activist and educator. She started her journey as an educator after she herself switched to sustainable alternatives to disposable sanitary pads. She has conducted educational sessions with young adolescents, young women, adults, sex workers, and prison inmates. She also conducts cloth pad stitching trainings. And apart from this, she is also a part of the Antakarna group, a mental health advocacy group, as a governing body member and as an associate with the Rangeen Khidki Foundation. Chaitali, who is our student voice today for PCOS, was diagnosed with PCOD last year. Passionate about books, food, and feminism, she's also part of the editorial board of WDC and LSR and has recently started working with Pink Legal, the first website for Indian women rights and laws, as the college representative. Havisha took up humanities in 11th grade and is further planning to pursue psychology in college. She was diagnosed with DUB and endometriosis when she was about 15 years old. She's passionate about writing poems in Hindi that concern society and even herself. Without further ado, let's begin. For all the attendees over here, I'd just like to inform you that on the right hand side there is a chat box. So during the session, at any point of time, if you want to add something or raise a point, feel free to send it on the chat box. On the right hand side below the chat box, you also see a tab which says questions. Towards the end of the session, for at least 15-20 minutes, we will have a question and answer session. Feel free to send us any questions for the panelists on the question tab, and feel free to speak your mind out and ask any doubts and queries without hesitation. So we will be starting now. I would be starting with you, Dr. Seema. What do you think are some of the most common menstrual disorders you see among women in India today? And what do you think is causing this trend? You will have to remove yourself from mute.
Sorry. Can you
Yes,
hear me now? Oh,
yes,
sorry.
I can.
Yeah. So, well, thank you so much, Anya. This is a beautiful evening today, and really glad to be part of this conversations. As far as period problems are concerned, they depend on the age group that we see. Amongst the younger age groups, we see a lot of heavy periods followed by periods of amenorrhea. That means, periods don't come regularly, and when they come, they are very heavy and painful. This is what we see in the younger age group. And towards the menopausal age group, we see irregular intermenstrual bleeding and again, very, very heavy periods which don't stop without medication. So, if you could just sum it up in one go, probably it is heavy menstrual loss, which I see mostly in my OPDs. And for that, a lot of women come to me. Uh, Again, the problems vary depending on the age group that we see. Uh, when we people are starting with their periods, it is not uncommon to have, say, one period in a year for the first 1 or 2 years, and now it is considered normal. And in fact, according to the newer classification, uh, we, we are kind of refrained from even doing any diagnostic tests or anything before 20 years of age. So the word body is coming to the conclusion that before 20 years of age, it is quite natural to have irregular periods or have scantier periods, unless the woman herself is extremely disturbed about it.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. I will be moving to you, Jhanna. We see a lack of awareness regarding menstrual disorders, especially in the rural sector today. Many of these women don't even know how and why periods occur. So, how do you think we should reach out to them and tackle this problem at a grassroots level?
Thank you for the question, Chaitali, and a very good evening to everybody present here. It's a pleasure to be here. To answer your question, I think that it's not only the lack of awareness about menstrual disorders, but menstruation itself, be it a rural population, be it the urban population, um, stigma and unawareness about periods is something that is a major blocking block which comes in our way as educators or maybe as activists when we go on ground. I feel it's important to spread awareness as independent bodies and to also align with a lot of government initiatives that are running but might not be implemented well within majorly affected districts. So, for example, the RKSK, which is the Rashtriya Kishore Swasthya Karyakram, it's a very good policy that the government released quite a few years back. And I've been in touch with various organizations, for example, the YP Foundation and other organizations who are working in the field of reproductive and sexual health rights, even Pratisandhi for that matter. And if you go to these districts where the programs are implemented, we would see that there is not only lack of facilitators there, but also a lack of proper implementation of the curriculum. And if we can get in touch with these government policies, get in touch with facilitators there who are people of the government sector, but also people from the non profit backgrounds, if we get into touch with them, have a proper curriculum in place, I think awareness would be one step that would make the process of understanding menstrual disorders easier. Because if someone does not understand what menstruation is, people in rural areas consider menstruation itself as a disease. So, for them to understand menstrual disorders is a step ahead. We first need to tackle with the very basic understanding myths around menstruation. Ananya, you are on mute.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Chetali, coming to you now. Since you're the student voice for PCOS today, will you share with us your story about how you were first diagnosed with PCOS? How did you first realize that something was wrong and you need to go get checked up with the gynecologist or go and get some tests done? What was the story like?
Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. For me, it was last year summer. Uh, Within the month of June and July, I was under a lot of stress and I was undergoing bodily changes. So when my periods started going short and my body cycles and my hormones were imbalanced. I mean, I could feel it myself. So I just attributed it to that, it must be stress. It must be because I'm working so much with my internship, here and there. But within a period of time, there were a couple of symptoms that I did experience. So one major thing was hair fall. I was losing a lot of hair, unnatural. It was the way I was losing hair. It was really bad, and then the spotting began. So instead of getting periods, I was a person who used to get a heavy flow for about a week. From that, I suddenly reduced to a very, very minimal flow for about 2 days. So I definitely realized that something was wrong. Now, I was lucky enough, indeed, that did have two friends who had already been diagnosed with PCOD. So I was aware of what this is. So I consulted a gynecologist, and she directed me. She said that all the symptoms were of PCOS, but also that it was important to get an X ray before jumping to any conclusions, of course. So I got an X ray done, and then I was finally diagnosed with PCOD as I thought it was. But I feel like for me, it was very simple. For many people, like including my friends and including so many others, it is so hard to pinpoint that this one thing might be your condition, because firstly it's so unknown. I mean, we're not educated about menstruation properly, so let alone problems related to it. And I feel like in especially a country like India, where a disease that causes you weight gain or extra hair growth and irregularities and mood swings is just attributed to a lifestyle disease, that you're not exercising, you're not doing enough work. But yeah, that is pretty much my story. Thank you.
Alright, I will be moving to Havisha now. So, Havisha, often the symptoms of endometriosis are taken for common period symptoms. So, how did you, like as Chetali said, the symptoms that she had started noticing, how did you first start noticing that there are some symptoms that you're getting and you need to get yourself checked? And what are these symptoms which a person gets if they have endometriosis?
Okay, so hi everyone. I hope my voice is clear. Yeah. Okay, so there are times when we think that if somebody is getting any symptoms, they think that it is okay, it is normal, it's just a mere imbalance. But in my case, I got my first period when I was 13, and for 1.5 years, everything was okay, normal. All my cycles were okay, but as soon as I turned 14 and a half, 15, I saw a lot of changes. So I got my period, and I got it for 5 days. It continued for 7 days, 10 days, 15 days, and it went on for like a good 1 month. So then it was, of course, a sign of worry. And so we consulted a gynecologist in Max Patparganj. So she asked us to, you should definitely get an ultrasound done. So when I got it done, so my endometrial thickness, which is normally when you're bleeding, it sheds down. So mine was not shedding, and it was increasing every day. So mine was around 16 to 17 mm, and that was the time when I was diagnosed with endometriosis.
All right. Dr. Seema, I will be moving to you again. So, like you mentioned about, there are times when girls or younger women also get periods once a year. So, how do irregular periods affect the body, or what is it that exactly causes irregular periods? And, because hearing this, it's difficult to understand that when we should start looking at irregular periods as a problem, and it could be normal as well. So, how much irregularity is also normal?
Well, that's a very, very good question, Anya, because um irregularity of periods, to understand that, you need to first understand what is normal. So, what medically we consider normal is any period which is coming within 21 to 35 days. That means if you have a bleeding today, you consider that day as a day one. Now you, if you are able to pass 21 days, and you know your next bleeding starts on day 22, this is the earliest time you are in the normal category. And and if the next one doesn't come till 35 to 36 days, that's when the abnormality starts. So every girl, every woman should have a menstrual calendar. The apps are very available these days. They almost everybody has them on their phone. So you must understand your own menstrual rhythm first. Just watch it for a couple of months, for say 5 to 6 months, and then understand what is the shortest cycle length and what is the biggest cycle length for you. Irregularity of periods in a younger age group is not really considered very sinister. Unless the periods are coming very frequently, you're bleeding very heavy, so you have a danger of getting anemic. But any older woman, say in her 40s, or especially menopausal women, once they start to bleed after they have attained menopause, those are more sinister reasons. And the irregularity can be because of problems in the ovary or problems elsewhere. Uh, Essentially, a lot of youngsters consider hormonal imbalance as a cause of irregular periods, and by that, hormonal imbalance, we essentially means that they have a PCOS. But it's not only PCOS which can cause hormonal imbalance, it is usually also thyroid issues, prolactin issues. There are certain hormones which are released from the brain. There are brain tumors. There are somebody has issues. There are multiple issues which can, I don't want to jumble up the panelists with the medical knowledge. But yes, a basic ultrasound usually tells us, is there anything with the ovaries or not? Because for the diagnosis of PCOS, we need two out of three things: a patient who has irregular periods and an ultrasound showing polycystic ovaries. So that's why we always ask you for an ultrasound to come confirm. Uh, and whether we do hormones or not is a choice with us. It depends on what the patient is looking at. So these two things are very essential to understand that the patient has PCOS. And majority of the youngsters would fall into this category. And in my practice, I see almost 40 to 50% youngsters who are coming to me with any kind of menstrual problems would have a polycystic looking ovaries on their ultrasound. And I through this panel, I just want to clarify one thing, that as doctors we have very strict criteria for polycystic. A lot of times on ultrasound, the doctors whoever are doing it, they just like polycystic looking ovaries. That does not fit into the criteria of a polycystic ovary. We have very set, the ovary has to be enlarged, it has to have a certain number of follicles, the volume has to be high, all those. So you need to go to a good radiologist who would certify all those points and who's aware of the criteria. But having said that, anybody who's having irregular periods always lives under a constant fear and threat. Okay, now the periods are going to start, and now I'm going to start bleeding, I need to carry the pad and this and that. It does create havoc with the woman's psyche. Along with that, I must caution that every woman should have at least 4 to 5 periods in a year. This is essentially true because for a lot of women, people feel it's very happy. Koi baat nahi, period nahi aa raha, it's all right. 3 months, 4 months, periods will come, it will come. I'll go next month to the doctor. But if you delay it, like our friend just mentioned, that her endometrial thickness was going up, so when the endometrial thickness goes up beyond a certain level, it increases your risk of endometrial cancers, that's the uterine cancers. So to avoid that possibility, you need to have at least 4 to 5 periods in a year. So all those people who are in athletics, sports, people who want to, off and on keep taking medicines for pushing periods, they're going camping, this, that, please ensure that you have at least one period in 2 months. So that is what I want to kind of spread awareness about, that if you don't have a period in 2 months, please take medicines, get a period. These medicines are not harmful, but if you don't have a period, you could be harmed, right?
Thank, thank you, Dr. Seema. I think that gives a lot of us clarity about, when we should start being worried if and not with having irregular periods, and what exactly irregular periods are. Moving on to you, Jana. Just another question about, you know, How do you think? So you did talk about stigma, which is there around menstrual problems, about bleeding. So how do we deal with stigma around menstrual orders in rural as well as urban settings? Because like you mentioned, they still in rural areas they might look at it as a disease even today, but it's not just the rural areas, but even in urban settings where people do look down upon you, and there are certain rules and procedures that you have to follow. That if you're bleeding, you can't go to a temple, you can't water the plants, all of these things. So, how do you think that one tackles all of these institutional beliefs that have been, that we've been brought up with?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the stigma can be bashed, but it's a long procedure. And I think there are three angles to it. If we look at it, we need to ensure that there is knowledge about the process, knowledge about what menstruation is, knowledge about what is the anatomy of the reproductive organs. A lot of women, when I talk to them, do not understand as to what is a vagina, what is the difference between vagina and anus, what is the urethral opening. So there's a lot of absence of knowledge regarding basic anatomy of the body. Then there's absence of understanding of products also. So products and its menstrual products and their growth throughout like a lot of years has been a shift from cloth to sanitary pads. Now we're again talking about cloth pads which are reusable in nature. So whenever I go to people talk about cloth pads, they generally get very confused as to why are you asking us to use cloth? It used to be unhygienic. So how come now you're getting back to us telling us to use a cloth pad, wash it and then reuse it? So there that is a lot of confusion for them. And moving beyond products, there's also lack of knowledge about services. People do not feel comfortable talking about their pain, their irregular periods to even people around them. So going to a doctor, going to a gynecologist is something that is not very usual among people, be it the rural population or the urban population. I'm sure there must be a difference. There must be more awareness in the urban sectors, but we definitely know of different regions where there is lack of knowledge. So I think all these things, knowledge about the body, products, and services is very important, and so is the availability of these in both the spaces. There needs to be availability of adolescent friendly health clinics. There needs to be availability of hospitals in that particular region for the person to go to a doctor. Also, the affordability of these services. How many of us do actually have the money to go to a gynecologist, get a checkup done? Even if there are schemes where the government allows us to avail these services for free, are we aware of them? So affordability comes into play. And then there's the whole health sector that is contributing to it by its own stigma. So, for example, I've read about certain people in the health sector wherein they themselves have certain stigma about periods. So, they do not allow people or recommend people to use a certain product. So, stigma not only in the people on ground, not only the people who menstruate, but also to health service providers. I think that's also important to understand. So as a whole society, everybody plays an important part in destigmatizing periods. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're extremely right. It's not only about people who are in the health sector, but also people who are not in the health sector who have to start working on these, on the removal of these taboos against menstrual disorders or just menstruation in general. Chaitali, coming to you, since you've had PCOD for so long, what has been the most challenging aspect of living with PCOS, and how do you think that it has impacted your life today?
Um, I think I cannot pinpoint at one single way that it has affected me, but I feel like that there have been a couple of things that have, happened to me as a result of this. What I've realized is that when you talk to most people about PCOD and you start to discuss it, they view it as a very privileged disease with very privileged problems, with very privileged symptoms that, okay, your hair are falling, big deal, you're getting pimples, big deal, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, with me, what's happened is of course, there was hair fall from the start. My periods reducing drastically, becoming very irregular. What also I have realized after this is that my cramps, they've been very bad since about the age I was about 10 when I started getting periods. So I used to have bad menstrual cramps since then. But from the past about 1.5 year, the cramps have actually gone from bad to unbearable. So I think that has been a very challenging aspect, because you're not bleeding for 7 days, but you're getting cramps for 7 days, whereas there's only blood for 2 days. So you never know what's going to happen. It's quite unpredictable. And more than that, I also feel like that, just like people dismiss PMS as just, yeah, you're being moody, it's not a big deal. People also dismiss PCOS because it is not very discussed, and because it is so much more common. But because it's not pointed out that so many women have it, it's just taken as an everyday thing. It's taken that, yeah, this is the way it is. But also, yes, when it comes to me dealing with it, I think I was given a lot of hormones when I was diagnosed with PCOD. And like Dr. Seema said, that doctors prescribe hormones to certain people and they don't to certain people, and it's also a choice for them to whether to decide to take it or not for the condition. So for me, my mother was actually very skeptical about me taking such strong hormones, as just being just 19 to 20 years old. So I did opt for Ayurveda instead. Obviously, you have to follow it very religiously, like any other medical course. But thankfully, that this course has also like helped me a lot. I wasn't very sure about it, because when it comes to certain problems like these, where it's supposed to be strong hormones that are supposed to be helping in these conditions, I guess we don't believe in other causes a lot. But surprisingly, it helped me a lot, even though I was not very positive about it in the start.
All right, I think that gives us a very personal insight into the story of someone who's gone through PCOS and is currently living with that. And also, what are the alternatives to getting therapies and how to, deal with PCOS. So, Havisha, moving towards you, you also suffer from DUB, which is dysfunctional uterine bleeding. Awareness about this disorder is fairly low. So, do you think you can tell us a little about, what it is and how it has impacted you? A little, maybe you can tell us what it revolves around and how it has been for you.
So, DUB is basically dysfunctional uterine bleeding or abnormal uterine bleeding. So, in my case, DUB was actually the result of endometriosis because my endometrial thickening, it kept increasing every day. And I still remember there was a time when it reached 30 mm, and it was so scary because it was not shedding. I was bleeding continuously. So I had this whole thing thrice. So for one time I bled for like a month, then it stopped, and then I bled for like 5 months continuously. It was not stopping, and then we took, we consulted a gynecologist. We took medicines, but the medicines were not permanent. It was never a permanent solution. It was always temporary. And there was a time when I bled for 8 months, and it did not stop. So, I mean, it is really tough for somebody to, bleed for such a long time, and I was not getting the right diagnosis. So it's just that DUB was a result of endometriosis in my case because the endometrial thickening was not shedding and it kept on increasing. And it's not just DUB. A lot of menstrual disorders, the awareness is fairly low. Like even PCOD, if I ask somebody, if I ask a friend, they won't know about it in lot of detail. Everybody would be like, we don't know about this, what is it? So I think like overall the awareness about menstrual disorders is very low because I feel there is still a stigma and a taboo attached with it. And we see that people do not take out a pad in public. They'll give it to you in a black packet or something. So I think this is the reason. I strongly believe that this is the reason that menstrual disorders like DUB, the awareness is fairly low.
So, carrying forward on what Havisha said about the awareness being so low and how most of us don't even know about menstrual disorders, Dr. Seema, very often because of these things, we don't even recognize that the signs where something may be wrong. So, what do you think? What are the most common tales, or what is the most common telltales that tell us that these are indicators that you should go to a gynecologist?
Well, that's a very good question. See, first of all, anything outside the normal parameter, if you have, like I said, the period duration should be within 21 to 35 days. You should, on an average, bleed from anywhere from 3 to 5 days. That is the average. So, if somebody is bleeding beyond a week, then definitely, whether it is spotting or bleeding, or you start to spot before your periods, or your spotting continues even after your mainstream bleeding has stopped. If you have sudden bleeding after a physical relationship, or if you have had any kind of abnormal, any bleeding episode which is outside the normal purview for you, you should always visit a doctor and have a checkup done. As I already mentioned, and I've been hearing a lot of young speakers talking about the diagnosis not being there and all that. Sitting in Delhi seems a little odd that yeah, people still are struggling with diagnosis. But yeah, anything, you have to decide for yourself what you have been experiencing normally. And I normally say, okay, sometimes, these medicines definitely are not going to take care of your lifetime benefit for your menstruation. All these, we give a lot of hormones, we give a lot of medication to stop bleeding. But there is a lot of stigma around even taking medicines. Yes, people don't know about menstruation. People on top of that are even more skeptical about taking hormones. Like even our panelists mentioned that they were very skeptical, though it's an individual choice. But you understand, if you are already having a hormonal imbalance, that means your one hormone is high, the second is low. So if you have a low hormone, this hormone is not only important for your periods, it is important for your bones, it's important for your heart, for your thyroid functions, for your lipid profile, for your sugar maintenance. So eventually, whether you take homeopathy, whether you take ayurveda or allopathy, they get converted into a certain hormone which was lacking into your body, and that's how they work. So youngsters should also work on not only removing the stigmas of menstruation, but also the stigma of medication. You see, birth control pills are very commonly prescribed for PCOS, and I feel people who are taking it really improves their lifestyle. Your periods get, you have less bleeding, your periods get regular, you have less pain, in every aspect. They become more predictable, and once you complete the deficiency, you're doing better. So still, a lot of them would just listen to doctors and then go back that and decide on themselves that, oh, they don't want to do that. And I would talk about the stigmas associated with medical fields. Is It is very frustrating for us doctors that we've been trained into some subject for years and years, and here are people, they listen to their chachis and thais and even their kamwalis, and then kamwalis will say, no, no, you should not take these pills, they are bad, they are hormones, they are high dose, they will spoil your body. And people choose to listen to kamwalis instead of qualified medical personnel. So I guess stigmas need to be removed from every level.
I think this also reminds me of how there are so many institutional hindrances about this entire thing you talked about stigma. We didn't even focus much upon the fact that there is stigma not only to the fact that it happens but also to how to cure it and about medicine. So Janna, moving towards you, you know, since you're an activist and since you've been facing and dealing with all of this, working towards progress in this field, how are you as a person and as an activist and as someone who's so active tackling with these institutional hindrances behind this entire stigma? What is it that you're following and what is it that you think that these are some guidelines that we as youth or we as people who are responsible citizens can move towards making it a better place and more acceptable space for everyone?
Yeah, so for discussing a very interesting institutional barrier that I've seen, I'd like to discuss an instance here. And I'm also a student of law, so it makes sense to share it with you and also ask for all of your insights. So, around 1981, there was this woman, a 21-year-old woman in Rajasthan, who pushed three children into a well, and it turned out that two of them were saved, but one of them died. And she was charged for murder for this particular case. So her lawyer, the trial court actually convicted her of murder, and she was on the row. But a few years later, they appealed to the High Court. Now the High Court was listening to the matter, and the lawyer for this woman said that since the woman was diagnosed with PMS, and she has had a severe case of PMS in her life. And he also brought doctors, three doctors, to verify this. They said and appealed to the judge that this woman should be acquitted of murder. She should not be tried for murder because she acted out of her premenstrual syndrome. She was not aware of the consequences, and PMS can cause this in women. So the judgment actually stood in favor of her. This woman was not convicted of murder. And there was a lot of debate about how the Rajasthan High Court is not right in giving out this judgment. So the dilemma here was the fact that is it a progressive step by the Rajasthan High Court, which is a legal institution in itself, to bring into consideration that PMS can be of such severe nature that it can cause someone to commit a crime, and they can be pardoned for it because there is a defense here. They can say that we were not aware of this particular the consequences of my act, and you can, as per legal provisions, you can be pardoned for it. So, is it a progressive step? Or considering the history of women's agency, considering the history about menstruation being considered a disorder itself, is it adding to the stigma? So we need to look at stigma in terms of the recent advances, the recent approaches that the government and other institutions around us are making. For me, considering PMS here in Indian scenario as a defense for murder was not a very progressive step because a there is not much research in India about PMS and PMDD. PMS is premenstrual syndrome, and PMDD is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is a recognized depressive disorder under DSM. There's not much research about it. Plus, as a law student, I've read the judgment, and it shows how there was lack of evidence to prove this. So I'd encourage people here, and if the panelists have not read this judgment, even the attendees of this webinar, to look at this judgment. It really portrays how stigma can be removed. Plus, maybe it is adding to the already existing stigma through these things. Another thing we can briefly talk about is the GST. Is it a progressive step, or was it actually destigmatizing periods? But there was a whole movement of how we talked about lahu pe lagan, and we then asked the government to remove the tax from menstrual products. So taxing menstrual products is another very big block in the way of removing stigma about periods. Period products in a lot of countries are available for free. Governments and other bodies who make these products do not charge us for that. So these are two examples of how institutional stigma can be seen in terms of contemporary times, modern times, and modern steps by the government and even legal institutions.
All right, Jana, thank you so much for sharing with us. I think that was a very big insight. I myself hadn't heard of that judgment before, and it just gives me a new insight and new questions to think about. So, Jayatali, moving towards you, um, what is what is the piece of advice that you would like to share for someone who may be going through the same, and how do you think that they can cope up with PCOD? What would be your piece of advice to people?
Yeah. So, of course, I'm not a doctor, so I cannot offer professional advice. But I would just like to answer this question by narrating as to what I did myself to cope up with this problem. So once I was diagnosed with it, everybody started chipping in with their pieces of advice. As the doctor said, everybody is going to tell you what to do. That chips mat khao, chocolate mat khao. Like, now your life is over, and all you have to do is live on khichdi and vegetables. So it's a scary time because it's like a second phase of puberty hitting you all over when you've already dealt with the first phase, and then on top of that, a lot of people are telling you a lot of things, and you do not know what to do about it. So what I did was, first I said, okay, let me talk to people who have actually gone through this, are going through this, who have experienced the same thing that I am experiencing, and because they will be able to give me a real life sense view of what this actually is and what you can do to cope up with. I read a lot also about this problem, and from that I inferred that, of course, you need to take time to process what has happened, and a lot of times you will be angry because you will be gaining weight, and for somebody who's never got pimples in their life, suddenly they will be just covered in acne, and you will be getting a lot of unwanted hair growth, especially in times where body hair are so looked down upon on women. So a lot of unwanted things are happening to you. So I guess the first step for me was to tell myself that it's not my fault. I did nothing to trigger it, because a lot of times, we are told that, yeah, probably because your lifestyle was so bad, you triggered it, you brought it upon yourself. So I think the first thing to know is that it is not your fault, and what is happening to you, as much as you feel like you're not in control, there are conscious choices that you can make to make this an easier experience for yourself. So I started making conscious choices about foods. It's not like I eat 100% clean right now, but yes, I've just become a little more conscious about what I'm choosing, whether it is heavily processed or not. And once you start doing it, it's not that bad, because you realize that PCOD or not, it will benefit you in a large way, especially because of all the preservatives and the adulteration that is happening in our food today. I think the second would be that, before the diagnosis, I had become, I had adapted a very inactive lifestyle, and it is so easy to do when you have all of these excuses, and then you have your general problems in college life. Even if you have time, people like me especially, who are lazy, we will develop excuses that we don't have time, we have society work, we have this and that, and then later on in life, you have a 9 to 5 job, so it is hard to make time for yourself. But when I got PCOD and I realized that now I have a choice where this goes, I started researching on, what type of exercises are good for me, if I should be doing yoga, if I should be doing aerobics. So that is one more thing I picked up. So for anybody who has got this, or anybody who will get this in the future, my advice would be that you need to be very calm. You need to tell yourself that it is okay, and you don't need to blame yourself. You need to understand what this is. And I think my biggest help was just talking to people who have gone through the same, because experience is the best teacher. Anya, I guess that's a problem. Let me just message her.
Well, very well said, Chaitali, because it's very important to share with like-minded people and understand. And I know a lot of people have gone through PCOS. So you know what? As medically, what we consider PCOS is, uh, yeah, people have tendencies for it, but a lifestyle is considered a very big challenge in the treatment. And you know why this happens in some and doesn't happen in other people is multifactorial. It's not a very straight cut case. There are genetic issues involved. That Indians are genetically predisposed to diabetes, heart diseases, and PCOS is actually now considered part of a metabolic syndrome that the newer generation is struggling with. Well, diet has a very big role to play with. I also tell my patients that unless you learn to eat clean, this is not going to go away. So I would like to just kind of tell the audience that there are certain kind of foods which might trigger it more. And well, as you said, whether or not it helps you with your PCOS, it will definitely help reduce your tendency or anybody's tendency for diabetes later on. And these are, I say there are 5 food groups. One is, if you can reduce your flour, maida, your pizza, pasta, momos, noodles, Maggie, samosa, jalebis, and cake pastries, biscuits, all of it. If it's not a death sentence that you will never have them, but just have them in lesser quantity. And I say, if you feel like having a pizza, don't finish the whole pizza, have a slice and kind of distribute the rest. And also, diet, whatever you're taking is very important. Here, in PCOS, the timing is very important. It will be very good if you guys can just spread the word around to your friends who are suffering from it, that you are aware that hyperinsulinemia is responsible, right? Insulin is the hormone which is responsible for creating havoc of PCOS. So, the Western concept that, have 3 meals, 3 snacks, that means you're essentially eating every 2.5 hours, 3 hours of your waking hours, right? This should be avoided. One, you need to eat well, and also you need to not eat very frequently. If you eat very frequently, you're eating something, the insulin goes up and then it falls down very slowly. And in the meantime, you have another meal, it goes up again. So if in somebody's body the insulin level it remains up, hyperinsulinemia is going to cause a lot of hormonal imbalance. It is going to increase your tendency for diabetes. It is going to bring acne. It is going to cause hair fall. It is going to cause central obesity, hypercholesterolemia, all of these stigmata of PCOS. It's not only menstruation, it is your whole body which gets affected. So eat clean, fine. You should not eat very frequently. We ideally say if you have more than 6 hours gap between the 2 meals, it's fantastic. So I guess concept of intermittent fasting works very well with girls who have PCOS. And of course, you can't fight with your genes. So despite being lean, despite exercising, despite eating well, there is a chance that your PCOS may not go away. Well, if it doesn't go away, hard luck, but at least you try your best to do whatever you can. So that's about it. So well, Anya is on back on the screen.
So,
Yeah.
yes, I was just asking you. So, Chaitali had just talked about, about lifestyle and about unhealthy lifestyle. So, Dr. Seema, according to you, a lot, I mean, as far as I've also heard, a lot of time menstrual disorders are often linked to unhealthy lifestyle. So, how do you think we can make our lifestyle more healthy and be more vigilant in order to prevent such disorders? And is there really a connection between lifestyle and menstrual disorders?
Yes, there is a connection. There is a deep connect. This is what we were just discussing, that lifestyle is the number one intervention of PCOS. And before prescribing any medicines, we as doctors usually say that please correct your lifestyle, work it out for 3 months, see how much improvement it makes. And if it doesn't, then we can switch on to medication. So lifestyle essentially is eating well and exercise. And we normally say, 40 to 50 minutes of exercise besides having an active lifestyle. I hear from a lot of young girls, I walk to the metro station every day for my college, and, I walk to the canteen. So, I'm having exercise when that's not considered exercise. Exercise is when you're consciously pumping up your heart rate, and at least 30 to 40 minutes every day, or at least 5 times in a week is what you walk, brisk walk, jog, yoga, aerobics, treadmill, whatever you want to do will work fine. um, but be active. And this is not just a leisure walk for 10 minutes, or just moving in the house or doing a kitchen work. That's not exercise at all. uh, So one is exercise, second is eating well. And we were just discussing eating well is essentially you avoid certain things like flour, your milk products, your sugars, white sugars. And if you can reduce the carb intake by means of limiting your intake of, say, roti and chapati, chawal, all that, rice, have less of that. Minimize those things. I'm not asking you to totally refrain from it. And there are certain research papers which they say if you can have more than 50% of your diet as uncooked food, it benefits people with PCOS. And also the timing of food, have at least 6 hours gap between any, I mean, if you keep having like 5 almonds here and 2 dates here, and after that you're having a meal, so you might be eating well, but your frequency matters. More frequently you eat, more is the insulin requirement, and more havoc it creates. So sometimes you don't understand that I'm doing everything well. I hear it very often from people that मैं डॉक्टर कुछ भी नहीं खाती हूँ, मेरे को मैं अच्छा भी खाती हूँ, and the mothers will say हाँ डॉक्टर साहब बिल्कुल फर्स्ट क्लास करिए फिर भी नहीं, because also frequency is a problem. uh, I was just discussing that once you eat something, insulin secretion starts in our body. It starts to mop up the sugars, and it increases very rapidly but doesn't go down so rapidly. So it goes down very slowly, so it goes up, goes slow in a plateau. And while it is going down, if you had another meal, doesn't matter the proportion of meal that you were, you had very small portion, but then insulin goes up again. High insulin levels will create havoc in people who already have a tendency of managing insulin. So body keeps secreting insulin is, and eventually it gets resistance to insulin. And once it develops resistance, you will have stigmata of diabetes and other stuff which is happening. So exercise and diet extremely important. Beyond that, also there is a substantial chunk wherein people have done everything fantastically well, but they still have infertility, they can't conceive, they have problems with acne and other stuff. Well, you need to take a multi model approach, take help from multiple specialists, go to a dermatologist for your skin care, go to a gynecologist for your menstrual issues. But yes, lifestyle remains central to all treatments. It's very, very important.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Seema. Jharna, can you tell us? I mean, listening to you and seeing that there, so like the judgment that you mentioned, it seems like there has been progress in the kind of things that used to happen in the past and today. So, do you really think things have changed or are changing for the better? What do you think? Is there progress, or are people still that stigmatized, or there are still too many taboos, or do you think there is progress?
Yeah, so I think I cannot answer this definitely in terms of if there is progress or if there is not. But I see a mix of both, and I'm very hopeful of the fact that there will be progress. Let's talk about one of the progress in the manners that Sabrimala judgment happened, and there was a lot of debate about how women are not allowed to go to the temples. What is the whole reason behind women not being allowed to go into the temples? I read so many articles about it, from ranging from that women bleed, and in ancient times there used to be the temples used to be in foresty areas, so the wildlife was attracted to the smell of blood, and there was danger. Hence, women were not allowed. But again, these are reasons to just justify the myth, and these are reasons that might not even be true. But there were a lot of reasoning given regarding the myth of women not being allowed to go into the temples. But we saw how the judiciary was actively engaging in allowing women to go into the temples. There were also a couple of women who went inside the temple. So considering that there have been bad or certain things that are not very progressive in nature when it comes to menstrual rights, there have also been progresses in nature that some of the myths, taboos, some very orthodox that had no reasoning to them are now also being bashed by people. People are trying to defy such practices. For example, like even something as
Jharna,
small as not going
I
to the
think your
kitchen when you're
connection is
menstruating.
slightly weak.
I now see a lot of rural women also not now.
I was just saying, I think your internet connection was slightly weak in the middle. I couldn't hear the last bit. I think it's still a little unstable right
I
now.
can't.
I, can you hear me now? Okay, so I think Jharna's internet connection is slightly unstable. Um, can the rest of you hear me? Chaitali, Havisha, Dr. Seema,
Yeah,
can you?
yeah,
Okay.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
so we'll wait for her to join back. Till then, I'll move to Chaitali. So Chaitali, like Havisha and all of you have mentioned, and so did Jharna, that there are certain taboos. So have you ever felt or been through any kind of differentiated treatment because you have a menstrual disorder, or did you get any sort of uh, stereotypical behavior from, be it your friends, family, or someone else, or did you have to face anything like that because you have a menstrual disorder?
Um, I think fortunately in my case, I've been very lucky. So anything that I have faced has not been for PCOS per se, but more like for just menstruation. And I think all of us can relate to that, like not being allowed into the temple because you're menstruating, or because I was in a boarding school, so saying that yeah, you can't come to this area because you're menstruating. And of course, I'm sure like in all over India in rural parts, so many of us have heard of it, and it is still going on that you can't enter the kitchen, you have to eat food separately, and all of those things, that you can't draw water from the well. So I mean, personally, I've been lucky that I've been surrounded by people who are well informed, who are educated about menstruation, and they understand that the stigma around it is just a stigma and not the truth. But yeah, I can definitely say that this is not the case with everybody, and I am one of the lucky privileged ones.
All right, that sounds great. I think you would lucky in that manner. So, Havisha, just coming to you and just taking forward from what Chaitali said, that there are so many struggles anyway that one faces. So, how do you cope with the many struggles that come with living with not just one but two menstrual disorders?
So I had two menstrual disorders, and it used to get very tough for me to balance both the medical issue with the studies and everything, because I had my 10 boards at that time. So I think one thing which is very important is accepting what you have, because at times we are not acceptable to what we are going through. We are like, nahi nahi, hame to aise nahi ho sakta types. So it's very important to accept what you're going through. It doesn't matter if it's physical or mental, because in my case, my hemoglobin went down to it dropped to 6, and I became severely anemic. So it was really difficult for me to manage a lot of stuff together. But I think giving positive signal to your brain cells that it's okay, as Chetali said, that I am not the one who triggered this. So it's very important to accept what you have and be okay with it, even though it's not okay, but just giving yourself that positivity that yes, everything's going to be okay. So I think that was something which helped me cope with my struggles.
Right. Before I move on to Dr. Seema and while we wait for Jana, I would just like all attendees, if you guys have any questions, please start sending them to the question box. You will see it on the right hand side below, beneath the chat box. Once I'm done with Dr. Seema's last questions, we will be answering your questions. Also, it would be great if you could also address the particular person you want to ask the question to. So please feel free to start sending questions, and we will be moving into Q&A very soon. So, Dr. Seema, just coming to you, it's I think a doubt. So, like I think you mentioned about about pregnancy and about different things, which also a lot of us at college face this very important question that when we're having severe cramps, how do you decide that should you take a medicine or not, and how often, like if you're facing cramps every month, should you take a medicine every month, or which medicine should it be? Because we have heard how you know I've also heard personally how Meftal spas does affect your fertility. So is it really true? And when is it that one should start taking medicines for their cramps?
Well, yeah. You see, it depends on how severe is your pain, and everybody's perception of pain is different. I may be able to tolerate very severe pain, another person would kind of faint in that kind of pain. So, it's every person to themselves. You have to decide for yourself what is causing you discomfort and what is causing you pain. There is no medical criteria as to, okay, it has to be, a certain, we don't have a medical categorization of cramps. And so we generally ask people, how would you rate your pain, out of a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like, you just cannot tolerate, and 0 to 1 is like very little. So if the answer is more than 5, I think they need to take medication. Because as a doctor, I feel that, you have to live your life and you have to live another day well. There is absolutely no point in wasting 5 days of while you are on periods, and you are having cramps, and you're wasting those 5 days because you did not take any medication. You're just doing hot fomentation, you're trying to do some breathing and all. Well, those things are fine as a lifestyle, but they are not really going to reduce the cause of pain. And the cause of pain, we all know, is the excess prostaglandins that are released from your body in response to menstruation. And these prostaglandins basically affect every body differently. So if you have anything which is severe enough to disrupt your normal day to day living, you take medication. And Meftal spas is a common medication. You have a lot of from paracetamol to huge, we have higher medication also. But yeah, Drotins and Meftal spas and all are, these are commonly available over the counter medication. And there is absolutely, for a healthy person who has no kidney issues, once in a while, if you want to take one tablet, it's absolutely fine. Beyond that, if you feel you need to take more than one tablet a day, it needs to be prescribed. And first, your healthcare worker has to take a good history and see that these medicines are not harmful. Don't just keep popping them by yourself, because again, yeah, excessive pain could be because of endometriosis, could be because of thousand other things as well, ovarian cysts and other things. So endoadenomyosis, all those things can also cause a lot of excessive cramping. So it may not be normal to begin with. So first, at least go to a doctor, let her identify what you are having. If there is no definite cause available, it's fine to have one or two painkillers if it is disrupting your lifestyle.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you so much. That clears out a lot of doubts, especially for me also. Jharna, since you're back, would you like to continue with what you were saying? Because I think the connection got a little weak. So maybe you could answer your question again.
Yes, am I audible now, Anya?
Yes, you are. Now you are.
Yeah, great. So I was talking about how there have been progresses in the manner that we're able to bash some of the very orthodox practices that have been happening to us. For example, going to the temple might not still be allowed, but we are able to enter kitchens, at least some of us. I not generalize that. Maybe even have pickles sometimes if you want to. Going to the temple, if it is allowed. We know a big case happened after the Sabrimala temple was not allowing women to come into the temple, but then the courts have ruled otherwise. So there have been little progresses even in the sense that we're talking about periods more. This menstrual hygiene day, there were so many conferences, so many lives, so many webinars, and like today we are ending it with a great webinar on menstrual disorders. So I think talking about it has made it a little less stigmatized, but there's a long way to go in terms of making it available to everybody, making it available to even those people who are not literate, making it so simple that it is not difficult for them to avail basic necessities of life like a sanitary pad. So I think health comes first, and before that comes education about your health. If you're not aware of your body, your bodily processes, the stigma won't just disappear in just a year or maybe couple of years. It's a long movement, so it will take time to progress. But there have been small little steps by various non-government bodies, some government bodies, that can be helpful. And I think to look at not just menstruation but also like overall sexual reproductive health rights is something that we should take into consideration, something we should regularly read up as a matter of 5 minutes every day. That would definitely make us also more understanding of the concept, also make us comfortable talking to even around people around us, be it our parents, be it our friends. It's not necessary that to destigmatize periods we just have to go to a group of people in a rural setup, or go to a low economic group and talk to them. It can also happen just within our household setup, or maybe in our neighborhood, maybe typing a small informational post on Instagram. Like these are little ways where we can normalize it, not if not destigmatize it. So I think normalization is something we should try to achieve first.
Right, I think I completely resonate with what you said. So, thank you so much. I will be moving on to the questions now. Looks like we have a lot of questions for Dr. Seema, especially. So, I will just read out the questions and I will also ask the panelist who the question is for. So, Dr. Seema, this question is for you. So, Grishma says, I want to know about late menopause, age 56, unmarried, but still experiencing heavy menstruation. Uh, I think you were on mute, Dr. Seema.
Okay. Well, I assume the patient is in India. So in India, we are seeing two definite peaks where majority of women achieve menopause. One is one group is attaining it in the early 40s, and then the second peak is going on from 54 to 58. But anybody who's experiencing heavy periods after 50 uh, needs to have a yearly ultrasound done, and this ultrasound should preferably be a vaginal ultrasound. And after the period, that is the moment the bleeding finishes, say around day 4 or day 5, this ultrasound should be done. And if the endometrial thickness is more than 4 millimeter, she needs to undergo an endometrial biopsy to understand that she is not going to get into an endometrial cancerous phase, because uh, heavy periods at around associated with late menopause is a very high risk factor for endometrial cancers or uterine cancers. So I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I am just emphasizing that you need to get investigated at least, and not just leave it at one investigation, have it on and on yearly. She can also have certain blood tests done, which will tell us approximately how far is the menopause, so action can be taken accordingly. Essentially, it depends on the endometrial thickness. If it is very less than 4 millimeters after periods, we are happy. If more, or say 10, 9, 12, really not good, needs to be done something about it.
All right. Thank you so much. For Dr. Seema again, is it possible to have PCOS without weight gain?
Yes, absolutely. We have a lot of patients who have PCOS looking ovaries and they fit the criteria on ultrasound. They have hormonal issues. They have some other presentation. Some lot of people come to me, very lean people, absolutely no weight gain. They might even be losing weight. It is essentially because the weight is a set of what is your intake and output essentially, and your metabolism, and also how your thyroid is functioning. So only weight gain has got nothing to do with PCOS. So PCOS, we need two criteria out of three. You could be having the symptoms, irregular periods, you have acne, you have hair fall, you have weight gain, weight loss, voice changes, any of these, it's not that you need to have all, you can have any of them. But that's in symptoms. Then you have an ultrasound which suggests polycystic ovaries, and the third and the last is the hormones. So any two out of these three symptoms, ultrasound and hormones, any two, if they are positive, you fit into a PCOS. So it's okay, you don't have acne, you don't have a hair fall, you have only irregular periods, and your ultrasound shows a PCOS, you have a PCOS.
All right. So I think Janna, you can help us answer this. Are regular sanitary pads bad for health in the long run?
Okay. Here I'd say that any product, before you're switching to some other product or you're having trouble with your product, you should thoroughly read what are the ingredients. If these are not available, just look it up online. It's very helpful to understand what is present in your sanitary pad. I looked up this particular research done on Always pads. Always is basically Whisper. Called globally as Always. It is called Whisper in India. I think that's the deal. And it's important that you understand and research about your product and then see how good or bad is it. Secondly, it's really important to change the product every couple of hours. That's something I tell anybody who asks if cloth pads are unhygienic or if sanitary pads are unhygienic. I think hygiene can be maintained if we definitely change it after a couple of hours. I'd like Dr. Seema to like abrupt and stop me wherever she thinks it's fit. I'm just acting as an advisor here, not just telling them to use some other product. But I think that's the deal that if you're comfortable using sanitary pads right now, if you do not feel any sort of discomfort, you should definitely continue using it. But if you have reasons to switch, you might change them and look into the aspects of sustainability or look up if you're comfortable reusing products because apart from sanitary napkins, we do have tampons, we have cloth pads available, then we have menstrual cups. And all these products, before you switch to them, require a thorough research so that you are aware what goes into your product. That's the deal about it. I hope the person who asked this question is not facing any serious issues using sanitary pads currently. So I answered it in light of that.
All right. So Dr. Seema, I think this is again for you. So I have been diagnosed with PCOS 2 years back. Also, I was hospitalized because I bled for six after 6 7 months, and my hemoglobin went down to 5.1. And after the blood transfusion, I gained weight, and it's been 2 years, and I still feel fatigued.
Well, so is it a statement or is it a question? I mean, what does she want to
Yeah,
know?
so I think that she's asking that why is it that she still feels fatigue even after 2 years of all of this that has happened?
Well, fatigue is a very broad issue, and believe me, 90% of women who walk into my OPDs for any XYZ reason, they complain that they are tired. And they are tired of immediately after getting up, and they are tired through the day. The reason could be they are not sleeping well, but yes, if she's mentioned anemia, obviously hemoglobin and your B-folates and your B12 needs to be checked, and your vitamin D needs to be checked. And if you feel that you've got all your investigations under control and you are not suffering from any skewed values of thyroid and prolactin, then essentially I think if you just exercise more, your weight loss would start. Your body will be not reeling under the stress of extra body weight, and you will feel more energetic. It's a fact that when our body weight goes up, we feel more lethargic, we have no energy to even carry ourselves, our knees are hurting, our ankles are hurting, our spine hurts. So exercise makes energy. Contrary to a lot of people who tell me that I have no strength to exercise, when you just have to start. You start small and go. And gradually you would find that your energy levels are bouncing back. So it's not PCOS. Well, yes, PCOS is making it harder for you to lose weight. So if I have to put in an X amount of effort to lose 5 kgs, you have to put in 3x. But let me also tell the audience and a lot of young girls, they keep telling me that मैंने सब कुछ करके देख लिया, मैंने एक्सरसाइज भी कर ली, मैंने खाना भी ठीक कर लिया, मेरा वेट तो बिल्कुल लूज नहीं हो रहा है, एंड आई एम जिमिंग ऑल्सो, माई इंस्ट्रक्टर इज ऑल्सो फेड अप. So my advice is just hang on, because of your hormonal, like your metabolic syndrome. Sometimes like your coffers are empty, so your initial efforts on improving your metabolism goes to fill those coffers, and once your coffers are filled, then the extra goes up to show your weight loss. So weight loss is very slow to show, and by then lot of people give up, and they say it's been a month, मैंने इतना ठीक से डाइटिंग करी, इतना एक्सरसाइज करा, एंड कुछ भी नहीं हुआ डॉक्टर साहब, 1 किलो भी कम नहीं हुआ. So maybe, but it will start showing in 4 months or 5 months, but be at it, don't just give up. So internally, when things are just starting to happen, people quit in desperation. And also stick to a more sustainable form of exercise and more sustainable form of eating. It's a lifestyle, you have to go on with it. You just can't do it for a month and then quit and say that nothing happened.
Right. There's another question for you asking also, is it normal to have facial hair, that too extreme facial hair and hair growth on the body parts where it shouldn't be?
Um, well, again, the answer to that is very difficult without knowing your family history, because, a lot of people genetically are very hairy. I have a lot of sideburns, but I don't have a PCOS. But as you age, you generally see people having side locks, having thick hair on the sides, and uh, the reason is the androgens naturally increase, so you don't have to suffer from something to have those hair. But if you're suddenly seeing a crop coming up, like a male pattern, especially your hair on the sides are, you're balding from your head, you're having extra hair on your chin or your sides which were not there earlier, you're having thick hair growth on your upper lip, you are having thick hair on your nipples or your lower abdomen, something like a male pattern of hair, that is what we say. Obviously it is a sign of PCOS, it is one of the symptoms. Then you need to understand with your ultrasound that are you really suffering from any problems or not. Yeah, so extra hair could be normal for somebody, but a sudden extra hair is definitely a problem.
There's another question which says, how does one overcome premenstrual syndrome like breast pain, mood swings, etc.? And also, in addition to that, there's another question which says, what about the breakdown of walls during periods? The lumps aren't lumps, those are huge balls. Is it normal with everyone?
Uh, no, there are two different questions. So can we just take them one by one, please? What was the first one you said?
So the first one is ki, how does one overcome premenstrual syndrome like breast pain, mood swings, etc.?
Okay. Well, again with PMS, there is a whole big etiology. You could have psychological problems, you could have physical problems, and it is definitely more pronounced in phases of life when you are undergoing emotional distress. So a part of it can be overcome by, like, eating clean and doing some breathing exercises and doing some meditation. But if you have a physical aspect to it, if you are having really a breast pain, or you get a lumpy breast, or you're cramping so much, you need medication. And we have medications, a huge armamentarium of medication. But surprisingly, people really don't come forward for medication. They feel that they should do something, and lifestyle is fine, but if there is a problem, you need to take medication. Everything cannot be corrected by popping methi seeds, or just doing deep breathing. These things should go on as part of healthy living, but besides that, if doing it, even if after that something happens, you need medical advice.
Right. There's
Yeah.
another question which talks about the breakdowns of the wall. I think this is in relation to breakdowns of wall during periods. Sharmishta is asking, the lumps aren't lumps but are huge balls. Is that normal with everyone?
I guess she is referring to clots. Well, if you somebody is passing huge clots in periods, that's absolutely, absolutely wrong. Should not happen, because our menstrual blood has certain enzymes which break down and prevent these clots from happening. So if somebody is passing big clots, there is seemingly a problem, so she needs to consult a gynecologist. No, this is not normal.
Alright. Um, is it normal to bleed for 2-3 days during your periods? I think
Yeah.
it's that is it normal to just bleed for 2-3 days?
Like I said, everything is not really a end all. Like I said, 3 days and it has to be 3 days. For some people, 2.5 days is fine. But it also depends on how you were earlier and how you are now. If somebody was bleeding for 5 days and now over last 4-5 months you have reduced your period bleeding to spotting for only 2 days, there is definitely a problem. And also, I get this history very commonly in my clinics that earlier I was bleeding for 3 days and now I'm not bleeding for 3 days, I'm bleeding only for one day. Well, fertility is something that is a concern when I get a history like that. So I definitely need to check on the ovarian reserve. Most of the times there is a problem, but also 30-40% people are absolutely normal even with this history. So with age, you would find that excessive flow is settling down, and in those people 3 days bleeding is absolutely fine. So by our definition, anybody who bleeds from 3 to 5 days is perfectly normal.
Alright. Sharmishta is asking my gynecologist recommended to take Diane 21. On the other hand, my homeopathic doctors just to stop taking those pills. And I have no medication now because allopathy has so many effects. So what should I do?
Well, there is a conflict between different pathies because everybody is trained in their own kind of pathy. But let me tell you that allopathy as a science has been backed with maximal research. Though by I have a lot of homeopathy friends and Ayurvedic friends, and but despite their well-meaning advices to people, their pathies are not really researched well. I have seen, I am, I have seen a lot of unqualified people. A lot of countries do not recognize homeopathy as a science. They say it's quackery. In our country, we have a lot more faith on homeopaths as compared to allopaths. But as somebody who's been trained abroad and in India, I've worked many years. Diane 35 is very commonly used medication, and yes, if you start asking somebody for side effects, you can only be guided about side effects if somebody knows about the side effects. Like Diane 35, there is a huge book on side effects, starting from gastritis to maybe headache to mood swings to breast pain to most of the people would have none of these problems. But if you keep harping on and on that, okay, what is the side effects? Every side effects actually, every medicine has a sinister side effect, and allergies and everything, anything can cause death. You see, if I start listing, I can go from mild to death for anything, even for normal delivery. We consider normal delivery, but normal delivery people can, you can bleed, you can have XYZ complication, you can die. Even in cesarean, you can have a normal cesarean, and on the other hand, it gets complicated, people die. So, and surprisingly, people don't question their homeopaths, and homeopaths will say there is nothing, there is no problem. How is it that you're taking chemicals and there are no problems? It is they are not aware, no studies have been done with their products about the side effects, so they can't advise you. So I hear this question also from a lot of my patients that, doctor, I'm taking homeopathy because homeopathy has no side effects. When I say, fine, I have no problem, you take Ayurvedic, you take homeopathy, I have no problem, but also take my allopathic medication because this is what I'm trained in, this is what I can vouch for. And because this is worldwide the most acceptable science, Ayurveda has its own issues, homeopath is better in certain things. But again, as a more research science, I believe more in allopathy.
Right. There's another question which says, how does someone manage menstrual disorder after stopping a hormonal birth pill? For example, no menstrual flow for like 7 months after stopping the pill or irregular flow.
Sweetheart, I just said that, pills have got nothing to do with your menstrual rhythm. It was your own intrinsic body rhythm that was there, which got okay while you were taking those birth control pills. And also, while you're on birth control pills, please understand that one pack of, 21 tablets is not going to correct your menstrual disorder for life. Every pill has a benefit only lasting 24 hours. And if your body is intrinsically deficient in those hormones that you're taking, it is the body's problem. These pills are actually not going to correct the basic problem. The basic problem is going to be corrected by your lifestyle, by your eating well, by your exercise, and sometimes it cannot be corrected. So you need to be dependent on those hormones. So, after stopping the birth control pills, if you have gone back to a rhythm where you had no period for 7 months, you need to bring a period ASAP, because by now your uterine lining would have increased quite a lot. So, expect a heavy period. Every woman should have at least one period in 2 months. So, if you are having less than 5 periods in a year, you are definitely putting yourself at higher risk of uterine cancers. So you must go to your gynecologist, get a medicine, and get a period, and then talk about probably restarting birth control pills.
Thank you, Doctor. Havisha, this question is for you. How was your physical health affected in terms of sports and exercise when you got the menstrual disorder?
So because I used to bleed for like a lot of time, 6 months, 5 months. So I'm sorry, my I became severely anemic. So my hemoglobin dropped to like 5 and 6 point or whatever it is. I'm not sure. So it dropped to 6, and it was very difficult for me to uh, deal with the daily activities. So it was extremely difficult for me to indulge myself in any sports activities, in sports or any activities, or even dance, because I love that so much. So I couldn't do anything. So yeah, it was extremely difficult for me.
All right. Dr. Seema, another question for you. Is it normal to have diarrhea and vomiting during the first day of my period with heavy menstrual cramps? I'm suffering since 2 years.
Um, well, a lot of, as I said, there are a lot of chemicals which are released, like mostly prostaglandins, and some people cramps are because of endometriosis and adenomyosis. And endometriotic patches can be not only on the ovaries, they can be on the rectum, they can be on the vagina, they can be anywhere, and the symptoms will vary accordingly. So it is common for people who have endometriotic patches on their rectum to have diarrhea uh, and other symptoms while they are having cramps. Yes. Uh, but this usually, if it becomes again anything which interferes with your lifestyle, you need to take help. So if you feel you are just homebound in those 2 3 days when you have your periods, and this is a recurring thing and it's not improving despite taking probiotics and all, and you have painful physical relationships, or you bleed too much, your cramps are disturbing you, please take medication.
All right. There's another question which says, um, is it normal to experience excessive body pain and lower abdominal discomfort 4 5 days before the onset of periods?
Well, yeah, little bit of like cramps on the scale of say 2 to 3 out of 10 are very common, because these are the spasmodic dysmenorrhea that people have. And it is up 4 5 days before a periods, this is almost considered normal, provided it is not severe enough to interfere with your life and your day to day activities. I think you need not do anything about it.
Havisha, this question is for you. What advice would you like to give to people with endometriosis?
Okay, so not just endometriosis, but like any menstrual disorder. I think with my experience, I feel to take the right action at the right time is very important. Please do not wait for anything to aggravate or anything to happen, because it gets really chaotic, and it is very mentally draining. So the best advice from my experience would be to take the right action at the right time and get the right diagnosis done. Yeah.
All right. Dr. Seema, again, a question for you. What probiotics would you suggest to take during periods in case of heavy cramps, ones that won't have a negative effect on your body?
Look, probiotics cannot deal with the cramps, but probiotics can be for gut. Visilac is commonly available. Lactobacillus, any supplement with lactobacillus, even curd has a lot of probiotic. But probiotic will not deal with the cramps. So if you have cramps, you need anti-cramping medication. Broten or like meftal that we were discussing earlier, that too should be taken only if cramps are severe enough to disrupt your lifestyle. And then there are specific probiotics for vagina, or so you can't generalize. Probiotics have no side effects.
All right. Jarna, I think I will ask you this question. Someone has asked, does the use of menstrual cups affect the risk of uterine prolapse?
Okay, so I have never heard of this condition. Out of all the cup brands I've talked to and their users, they've never heard any person getting uterine prolapse because of using cups. I think Dr. Seema would be more experienced in telling us if it is possible. I don't think it has happened to anybody I know. Yeah.
Dr. Seema, can you tell us that if it's possible, if that can happen or not?
No.
Okay. All right. I will just say, if you guys have any more questions, please feel free to send them. We will be stopping with the questions very soon. I will just see if you have any other questions. Okay, another question for Dr. Seema. Is it normal to go from 3 days of heavy bleeding to 2 days of heavy bleeding, followed by minimalized bleeding for 3 days? So, in brief, 2 days of heavy bleeding plus 3 days of minimal bleeding.
Well, that's a normal variation.
There's another question which says, is it normal to just have spotting in the first day and then bleed for 2 3 days after that?
Yes, absolutely. That's a normal variation again. You could have equal bleeding in 3 days, 5 days. You could have heavy bleeding on day two, day three, and followed by 2 days of spotting. You could just have very heavy flow on day one, and the rest of the days are fine. All are normal variations, and they're absolutely okay.
I think this is in continuation to something that we talked about. Dr. Seema, again, it's for you. Can only irregular menstrual flow be a symptom of PCOS?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, that there is a whole list of symptoms that we consider as doctors, and it's not necessary that people should have everything to call themselves into fit into the category of PCOS. Irregular periods is one. Having diagnosed acne is another. Head hair fall is another. And head hair fall may not necessarily mean that you're losing all of it. You could just be getting bald from the sides, like we call it a temporal baldness, as in a male pattern of baldness. Your increase in body weight could be another symptom. Your body hair increase, your weight increase is another. So all of them individual. Some people only come to us with inability to have children. That's just one symptom. So, but symptom gets one mark. We also need to have ultrasound finding of a PCOS, and also or if ultrasound says normal, then we need to have abnormal hormones. So 2 out of 3 are important to diagnose somebody with PCOS. So it's not that only regular periods, you're normal on ultrasound, you're not having any hormonal issues. No, then you won't fit into a PCOS.
There's a question which says, is PCOS curable?
Yes, it is. Though the earlier thought was that once somebody has PCOS, you got to live with it. You can, once you have been diagnosed with PCOS, uh, essentially it means that you have a tendency for getting imbalanced very fast. But if you kind of keep your, like you're saying, we've been talking a lot about lifestyle and eating well, and essentially now we consider PCOS as part of metabolic syndrome. It's not a separate entity. So most of the times now we are also looking at not only the ovaries, but we are also looking at livers. Most of the times people with PCOS would have fatty livers, which earlier we were ignoring. So now fasting insulins are going up, or there is a hyperinsulinemia. So uh, PCOS is an entity, it's always going to remain an entity, but if you just kindly, look at your overall scenario, I think it is now we are able to correct it because metabolic syndrome is lifestyle. If correct your lifestyle, you may get better.
I think those were the only questions that we had. Thank you so much for being on the panel with us. To all four of you, thank you so much for coming,
Thank you.
sharing
Thank you
not
so
just your
much.
views, but also so much knowledge. And I think, as a lot of people have said on the chat box, that this has been very enlightening for all of us. Before we close, I would also like to thank our sponsors, Heyday and Nine, and we will be emailing six special attendees who will be getting goodies from Nine. We also have to announce our winner for the Nykaa gift voucher. Our winner is Christine Mendoza. She is the winner for the Nykaa gift voucher. And thank you so much for all of you to come, for you to take out time and come on board with us. Special thanks to Prati Sandhi and Girl Up Rise both for letting us organize this event. Thank you so much. And if any of
Thank
you
you.
have any doubts or queries, you can email it to us. And once again, thank you so much to the panelists and to all the attendees who took out time and attended our session. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.